The Battle of Sekigahara. Over 40,000 had died on October 21st in 1600. The Battle of Sekigahara was a Japanese conflict that caused the death of a significant figure, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi was a politician, a samurai, and a well-respected war general. Overall, he was well-respected and known in Japan. His death left Hideyori, his 5-year-old son, in charge of all of Japan. This conflict set up the outlines and machinery for a new feudal system about to be put into place. The system put into place was called the Tokugawa Shogunate. Ieyasu, the first shogun, experienced great success in the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. As a strong military leader, it made it easy for Ieyasu to triumph and effectively take over Japan in 1603. He was not only credited with unifying Japan, but for creating a dynasty that would rule the country for centuries. During this time, a feudal system was put into place for Japan. Many different classes emerged at this time. Merchants, servants, artisans, and peasants were all at the bottom of the social pyramid. In the middle were ronin, samurai, and daimyo. At the top were the shogun and the emperor, who at the time were just an idol and puppet. Merchants and servants made money off of other people's work, while artisans crafted goods out of wood and metal. Peasants were the highest of the lowest class. They paid taxes and held jobs as fishermen or farmers. Ronin were samurai with no master. Samurai were well-respected warriors in Japan, and the daimyo were nobles who owned land. They were also vassals of the shogunate. The shogun were the ones with the military and political power. Finally, the emperor was seen as a religious leader that had the power to appoint the shogun, but nothing more than that. During this time, isolationist policies were put into place, cutting Japan off in trade from communications with other countries. Yoshinobu Tokugawa, the last shogun, came to power in 1862. People by this time were tired of being taxed so quickly and heavily, and were tired of increasing prices of everyday necessities, such as rice. They were also unable to switch their classes. Eventually, he resigned, therefore ending the Tokugawa shogunate's long-lasting dynasty, but causing a beginning of something new. Another event happening at this time was the visit of Commodore Matthew Perry. He is credited with opening Japan up to the world. After his visit in 1853, he encouraged but rather threatened to open up Japan and trade with the rest of the world because of their highly valued resources. Japan had no choice but to follow his orders, or they would be destroyed by America's technology, which the Japanese hadn't seen before because they were under isolationist policies for over 2,000 years. The Meiji period, beginning in 1868, was what came at the end of the Tokugawa period. Although this period is known as the Meiji Restoration, the only thing that was restored was the emperor's power. The first emperor, Emperor Meiji, technically came to power in 1867. He was responsible for abolishing the feudal system and creating a new schooling system with a cabinet form of government. He also brought Western ideas like clothing, food, religion, and art into Japanese culture. He also abolished the isolationist policy as requested by Matthew Perry. After Japan opened up to trade, many Western ideas came flowing into the country, such as the new social system, new enlightened ideas, and for art and religion, and even technology inventions from the Western powers came to the country. These ideas changed Japan as a whole, causing the country to become more modern and industrialized. During the Meiji Restoration, many changes took place. One of these changes was the 4 new groups that had naturally formed: peasants, fishermen and farmers, artisan, crafted goods from wood and metal, merchants, sold goods to make money off of other people's work, and educated scholars, cabinet members, educators, people higher ups. Art was modernized, and Western ideas began to become more incorporated into the works, some of which still have lasting significance to the people, such as Seki's lakeside art. It was so important it created a Japanese twist to Western culture. The country also industrialized, becoming important producers of highly demanded resources like textiles, gold, silver, copper, iron, rice, and oil. This also helped them advance technologically, which would later help them against the Russo-Japanese War. This war caused over a conflict between Russia and Japan over who would have dominance in Korea. The reason that each country wanted dominance in Korea was because of the high-valued natural resources. The conflict started when the Imperial Japanese Navy attacked the Russian Pacific Fleet, Port Arthur, on February 8, 1904. After many battles fought land and sea, Japan came out victorious. 150,000 people died in this war. The war ended with the Treaty of Portsmouth, which actually was moderated by the US President Theodore Roosevelt. This was a significant victory because it helped Japan gain fame and respect from the Western countries. It proved that the Japanese army advanced significantly and industrialized, overall proving that they were equal to the Western powers. It also was the beginning of the spread of the Japanese Empire to Asia.
Filled with nationalism after defeating China in the Russo-Japanese War, Japan began to develop their own ideas as well. They believed that they were superior to China, Korea, and Vietnam specifically. This was because of their newly gained military technology and power, as well as their location as an island. Religion played a huge role because of the people in Japan believed that God favored their land rather than the other outside countries. China, Vietnam, and Korea were target countries for Japan because Japan didn't have any natural resources, but these countries did. Just like France and England, they could use imperialism to not only gain natural resources, but a stronger economy. Conflicts did begin to rise, however. China had sent 8,000 troops by request of the Korean king to help suppress an ongoing rebellion. This broke an agreement between Japan and China. The agreement was that they would not send troops into Korea. In response, the Japanese sent their own forces to Korea, forcing them out of the country. Thus, the First Sino-Japanese War begun. Originally, China was thought highly of, and people were optimistic about them winning the war by a landslide because of the number of troops they had. The Japanese, however, were prepared and industrialized, which helped them completely destroy the Chinese Navy. The Japanese also gained an outpost in Manchuria, a region in China. After this, Japan and China both signed a peace treaty called the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Korea also gained independence and was recognized, and Japan would no longer attack them. Japan also gained their first colonies, Taiwan, the Pescadores, and Liaodong Peninsula in Manchuria. Soon, the country began to become power-hungry and once again, like England and France, became greedy with gaining more land and money from their colonies. Japan began to advance further into Chinese territory, and finally, China had had enough and began to full-on resist in 1937. This was the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Japan invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria once again, using heavy artillery and bombs to fully take over the area and push further into Asia. They later claimed it as a Japanese territory and changed its name to Mochico. To further agitate the conflict, the Japanese also destroyed the cities of Shanghai and Nanking, which were important Chinese cities. The Chinese did fight back, and with great force too. The Second Sino-Japanese War resulted in a draw between the two countries in 1939 when Japan surrendered to the Chinese, who had gained help from the Allied forces. Soon after this, the US and Britain created an oil embargo, which meant that they would ban oil from being traded. This gave the power-hungry Japanese army an excuse to ambush America. The ambush came in the significant event of the 1941 Pearl Harbor bombing. Hideki Tojo was the prime minister in Japan when the attack took place, and he also gave the Japanese permission to do so. This was when both Japan and America joined World War II. Over the next few months, Japan would be responsible for taking over many Pacific islands and turning them into colonies. The Battle of Midway took place 6 months after the bombing at Pearl Harbor, which had a purpose of destroying the only surviving American aircraft from their last attack. This was when the US began to take back some of its Pacific island colonies. In the process, however, they had used many aerial strikes, bombs, and artillery. They also invaded the city of Okinawa. Finally, in 1945, the U.S. presented the Potsdam Declaration, which was meant to end the war. However, the Japanese refused, not bothering to compromise with the U.S. Japan finally surrendered in August, after the U.S. had bombed both Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This resulted in the loss of Japan's colonies, the loss of the war, and the end of Japan's expansion throughout the world. After the war, Japan was economically struggling. General MacArthur came from America to help with fixing their crumbling country. They used a plan with 3 processes: The first was to reform and punish. In this step, many generals and military officers were executed for various types of war crimes. These people were also forbidden to get involved with politics. A new constitution was also put into place, stripping the emperor of his power. Japan was also banned from leading a war as well as keeping a military. The second was rebuilding the economy. By shifting to industries with higher technology and trading with America, Japan's economy would be strengthened. Third and finally, Japan would strive for peace. In 1951, the Treaty of San Francisco was signed by 52 nations, including Japan, China. The Tokugawa Shogunate and the Meiji Restoration were extremely high points in Japan's history. Not only did Japan succeed economically, but the country itself also industrialized and modernized itself based off of Western ideas and adding in bits and pieces of its own culture. Japan also had low points, of course, such as the Japanese Sino Wars in World War II. The country got so obsessed with making money, gaining new resources, and gaining more land that they had to be cut off from it all. During this dystopian time, Japan sought only to imperialize other countries, versus the other periods of time where they were simply trying to modernize and industrialize their country. Japan's greediness at the time had caused a great deal of trouble. The Meiji Restoration took a turn for the worse after Japanese imperialism entered the picture, turning it dystopian. Despite this, however, the Japanese still supported their country. But why? The answer would be nationalism. Although bad things may have happened in the past, their country is still their country. And their country is where their people are united together as one through things like language and culture. This is how we visualize it every time. Although people make mistakes, they are still set on improving. Such strong visions like these are why countries are so focused on achieving a perfect utopian society.